We are in this next week of Nehemiah, and I wanted to, since I took last week to talk about something different, just give you a quick refresher before I get into the full text of it today. You know, Nehemiah was a guy who had a good job. He worked for the Persian king, and he was the cupbearer. He had a high-ranking job. He had access to the king. And at one point, God laid on his heart to go return to the homeland that he had never been, where his people are from, and to rebuild the walls of a city that he'd never seen. But God laid that burden on his heart, and he prayed about it and fasted, and God called him to leave that job, and he opened the door for him to do so. He needed to go back and he needed to rebuild the walls. And we've seen different stages in how they did that. We saw how they worked their way around the city and different sections of the wall and the different gates. But not only did Nehemiah rebuild the stone walls, with God's help, he helped rebuild their spiritual walls as well. With God's help, he helped them to restore their identity. Jerusalem became a city that they could be proud of once again. But we're in the process of that right now. But until you begin to rebuild your own spiritual, personal walls, you're going to have a hard time rebuilding whatever else that you're trying to do. If you're working on your business or rebuild your finances or rebuild your relationships, until you work on your own spiritual walls, it's not going to be on the foundation that you need, and it will continue to crumble. You can't build those things in the natural until you build what's going on the inside. You get to a point where you say, I'm just tired of my marriage being on the rocks. I'm tired of living in fear. I'm tired of being a failure. I'm tired of everything going wrong in my life. And when you get to that point, until you get to that point, you're not even going to pick up the brick. You're not even going to pick up the first brick to lay it. You'll be like the children of Israel who for over 70 years after the rebuilding of the temple in the city, they just sat there among the rubble and didn't do the work. They just sat there with the walls torn down and the gates having been burned, wishing that they could go back to the way things used to be. So we left off the story in chapter 4 with verse 6. The enemies were trying to convince them to not even start the work. However, Nehemiah inspired them, and in verse 6 it says, "We built the wall, and the wall was joined together to half its height, for the people had a mind to work." They reached halftime. And that's kind of going to be the overarching theme of what's going on here. All of this that we're going to talk about is this halftime point in the message. So I'm a college football fan. I like college football, and I watched some college football yesterday. Didn't turn out quite like I wanted, but it was still a good game. And you know, if you're a Seminole fan and a Miami fan, then all three of us lost yesterday. So I'm right there with you. But a few years ago, there was a bowl game. I like to watch the bowl games that come on near the end of the year or beginning of the year, depending on where they fall. But there was the Alamo Bowl. The Alamo Bowl took place, and Texas Christian University played Oregon in January of 2016. Now, the first half of that game, Oregon was destroying TCU. In fact, TCU couldn't do anything offensively. They were losing 31-0. 31-0 at the half. And the problem was that they couldn't score any points because the starting quarterback for TCU had gotten himself into some trouble a few days before and gotten kicked off the team. And so the guy who was replacing him had never started a college game before in his life. In fact, he was a senior walk-on, which meant that he wasn't recruited. He just happened to walk on the team and made the team. So now, the biggest game of the season, the bowl game, the Alamo Bowl, he has to be the one who is leading his team. So, you know, at the end of the first half, it's 31-0. They go in the locker room, and, you know, there's not a whole lot you can say when it's 31-0. They're just kind of getting pummeled. But the coach called the guy over there. He called the team in, and he started to rally the team. He started to speak into the team and encourage the team. Some of the fans left at halftime. Some of the TCU fans were like, I don't even want to see the rest of this game. I paid good money, and my team's losing 31-0. I don't even want to see them lose 62-0, so I'm just going to go ahead and go. Some of the Oregon fans were like, yeah, you know, it's getting pretty bad. We don't want to see them beat up on them that bad. So even the Oregon fans were leaving. But in the locker room at that time when these fans are leaving, the coach is encouraging the people. And the poor quarterback, he felt terrible because he was really the one that everybody was kind of blaming because he had never done this before, had never been in this situation. But the coach went over to him. And here's something else that I hadn't told you about this guy. The quarterback's name was Bram Kohlhausen. If you've never heard of him, that's okay. I had never heard of him either. In fact, he never went on to play in the NFL after this either. But in that moment, the coach went over to Bram Kohlhausen, and who was already feeling guilty, but Bram's father had recently passed away. And so he's carrying that burden as well. And the coach, Gary Patterson's his name, went up to him and said, Bram, I want you to know something. Your dad couldn't be here, but he's watching you tonight. Can you imagine if we came back and won? Your dad's watching you, and just think of how proud he'll be when you come back and win this game. And so Bram, with the weight of all of that, began to get excited. The team started to get excited. In fact, they were so energized and motivated that when they left the locker room, they went back out into the game, and they played the game like they never had before. Third quarter goes by, fourth quarter goes by. Oregon doesn't score another point for the rest of regulation. For the rest of the third and fourth quarter, Oregon doesn't score a point. Texas Christian scores 31 points. They tied the game. 31-0 in the first half, 31-0 the other way on the second half. So now they go into overtime. And if you watch football, overtime can get exciting. College football, the overtime, each team gets a turn. So they score, and Oregon scores, and then Oregon scores, and Texas Christian scores. So they go to first overtime, second overtime. They're now in third overtime. And man, I remember being up late and watching this and like, man, I really need to go to bed, but I cannot turn this game off. This is exciting. I don't follow Oregon or TCU during the regular season, but this was an exciting game. And at the very end, he has the opportunity here. Bram Kohlhausen, this unrecruited, walk-on senior second-string quarterback who happened to be the starter in this game, led his team back, and he himself carried the ball across the goal line on a quarterback keeper and scored the winning touchdown to win the game over Oregon. Now, the first half of that game was tough because they were losing 31-0. The second half of that game was even harder because now they were working to gain that ground that they had lost. But they had momentum, and it carried them through the end of regulation, through 2 overtimes into the third overtime. Like I said, Bram never went on to play in the NFL, but in his first and only start for Texas Christian, he led them to victory, and he won the MVP of the Alamo Bowl because he didn't give up halfway through. He knew that the game was not an event as much as it was a process. Same is true for Nehemiah. They didn't stop when they rebuilt the wall to half its height. You see, the second half of building the wall, things got a lot harder. That's when they had to pull double duty in order to make it to the finish. We're going to be in Nehemiah 4, beginning in verse 7. But when Sanballat and Tobiah and the Arabs and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites, remember these are all the enemies that did not want to see them rebuild. When they all heard that the repairing of the walls of Jerusalem was going forward and that the breaches were beginning to be closed, they were very angry. And they all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and cause confusion in it. And we prayed to our God and set a guard as a protection against them day and night. In Judah, it was said, the strength of those who bear the burdens is failing. There's too much rubble. By ourselves we'll not be able to rebuild the wall. And our enemies said they will not know or see till we come among them and kill them and stop the work. At that time the Jews who lived near them came from all directions and said to us 10 times, you must return to us. So in the lowest parts of the space behind the wall, in open spaces, I stationed people by their clans, with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles and to the officials and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. Verse 15. When our enemies heard that it was known to us that God had frustrated their plan, we all returned to the wall, each to his work. From that day on, half my servants worked on construction and half held the spears, shields, bows, and coats of mail. And the leaders stood behind the whole house of Judah who were building on the wall. Those who carried burdens were loaded in such a way that each labored on the work with one hand and held a weapon with the other. And each of the builders had his sword strapped at his side where he built. The man who sounded the trumpet was beside me. And I said to the nobles and to the officials and the rest of the people, the work is great and widely spread, and we are separated on the wall, far from one another. In the place where you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. So we labored at the work, and half of them held spears till the break of dawn, until the stars came out. I also said to the people at that time, let every man and his servant pass the night within Jerusalem, that they may be a guard for us by night and labor by day. So neither I nor my brothers nor my servants nor the men of the guard who followed me, none of us took off our clothes. Each kept his weapon at his right hand. It was a process. It wasn't just this one-time event. It was a process. To say that life is an event would be like saying, yeah, I lived once. But to acknowledge life being a process is to say, I'm still living. In the same way, for us to finish rebuilding our walls, we need to see our wall project as a process, not an event. If we look at chapter 3, when we saw chapter 3, that was the list of the people and the gates and who was working. If we were to just look at that, we could see that as an event. This person did this, and this was done. But chapter 4 shows us the process. It shows us a deeper, more difficult journey. And it's great to see because it's an example of how life really is. It's not just, okay, boom, there's that, and then that's it. Life is a process, and there's going to be days that you wish you could just skip over. There's times when I'm reading a book, and if it gets boring or if I know what they're saying, I'll just turn the page and make sure that by the time the end of the chapter, I've read the summary and I know what all's going on. You can't do that in life. There's days that you want to skip over, and you can't. Some of you might, if you ever watch a scary movie, you cover your eyes at certain parts because you just don't want to see that part. In life, we can't cover our eyes because there's things that we just don't want to deal with. Too often, actually, people stick their head in the sand because they don't want to deal with what's going on. But the reality is, as part of the process, we have to face that head on. And when it comes to rebuilding your walls, just because you want that wall to stand up straight doesn't mean it will. It's actually a process. And some days you won't get as many bricks laid as other days. And some days it doesn't turn out as you suppose. I'll give you a few things about the bricklaying. That first of all, there's no place to start except the bottom. When you're laying bricks for a wall, you can't start at the top. Okay, here's where I want the top to be, and you hold that brick up, that's going to fall, obviously. You can't start in the middle of a wall. You have to start at the foundation, and I'm going to get into that a little bit more in just a few minutes. There's no such thing as a shortcut. You could try a shortcut, but it will end up compromising the integrity of the structure. If you don't start out right, you will not end up right. Now, you can start out right and get off track, but if you don't start straight, you will never end straight. And the other thing is that the whole wall is waiting on that first block to be laid. You've got to start. You can't sit around the rubble and say, yeah, somebody needs to come along and do this. You've got to start at somewhere and lay that first brick. And when we look at Nehemiah, we see the process. So part of the process is the ability to make adjustments along the way. I mentioned that talking about the football game. That coach went in at halftime. He changed the game plan. He made some adjustments along the way. Oregon was doing certain things that they couldn't stop. So what he did was he made some adjustments, and he made some other adjustments on offense so that they could put some points on the board. So you make adjustments along the way. Nehemiah could see halfway through construction that the enemy was making adjustments to their plan. So Nehemiah now had to make some adjustments to his approach. Verse 8, and they plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause confusion in it. They wanted to cause confusion. So before the physical battle took place, they were sowing seeds of discord. They were confusing people. And that was their goal, to cause confusion. So they spread around false information. And that false information even deceived the Israelites. There were some that were close to them that believed the lies of the enemy. In Judah, it was said, verse 10, the strength of those who bear the burdens is failing. There's too much rubble. By ourselves, we will not be able to rebuild the wall. Now, this isn't the enemy saying that. The enemy sows the discord, and it's the people of Judah that are saying, we can't do it. You see, God gave Nehemiah the vision, and anything contrary to that vision was misinformation or fake news. Anything that is against what God had told them was misinformation. But the people of Judah, again, this wasn't the enemy that said this. It was the people of Judah, which is one of the tribes of Israel. You can trace the lineage of Jesus back. The tribe of Judah was the one where King David was of the tribe of Judah. You can go all the way forward and see Jesus came from that lineage. So this isn't just some people. This isn't just some nobody. This is one of the major tribes of Israel. Those people are the ones saying the strength of those who bear the burdens is failing. There's too much. By ourselves, we will not be able to make it. Why did they believe the word of the enemy? Why did they believe the misinformation? Well, why do we believe misinformation today? Why is it that so many good people of God are believing things that are not true? Because the enemy is pretty crafty in how he goes about things. And as with most misinformation, if he can put a little bit of truth in there at the beginning to distract somebody, then you're focused on this instead of the bigger picture, and you can be led away from the truth and from the vision that God originally laid. There was enough truth in the lie to deceive even God's people. Where was the truth? There's rubble. They're getting tired. There's a whole lot of rubble that they have to sift through. Those things were true. What was the lie? That they can't do it. So the enemy will tell you that, okay, well, this is this, and okay, here's the truth. And you will end up being led astray by somebody who maybe even someone who you would say, oh, well, they're Judah. They're from the tribe of Judah. They're our people. They believe like we believe. And if they say we can't do it, maybe we should listen to them. During the rebuilding process, it's not about the rubble as much as it's about the foundation. Because yes, there was rubble all over the place. For 70 years, they sat there after the temple was rebuilt. So we're looking at 150 years since the walls had originally been torn down. But since the temple had been rebuilt, they had been sitting around this rubble of the walls for 70 years. So they knew it, and they looked at it, and some of their own people were saying there's just too much rubble. Everybody's tired. But the rubble is on top of something. The rubble is on top of a foundation. The rubble is on top of something that will not move, that did not move. It never changed. All they looked at was the rubble, was the problem, was the difficulty. But that was not the problem. Yeah. So I've got some rubble here today. I brought some. Let me make some room here so you can see it. I'm going to make a mess. Y'all want to see me make a mess? What is this? That's a whole bunch of rubble. That's a whole bunch of rubble right there. And you know what I see when I see that rubble? I see a place. Well, I can't stand there. If I stand there, I'm going to fall. Oh. Is Lindsay in here? Because she's seeing me do this. She's going to get on to me. She's not in here? She's counting. All right, good. I'll stand on it. If I build on this, it's going to fall. If I continue to try to walk on this, see? Look at there. There's too much. We just can't do it. I'm tired. There's too much. Don't let the distraction of the rubble, the true thing, yes, there's a little bit of truth, that there's some rubble around you. There's some things that have happened that have made your foundation a little bit shaky, but that's a lie because the foundation isn't shaky. You've got to remove it. You've got to dig down and get to the bottom where the foundation is and realize that the foundation, which is God, which is His Word, has never changed. You've got to work to clear the rubble. Yeah, sure. We've been built on a firm foundation. We've been built on a strong foundation, but the battles of life have left us vulnerable. You see, you can remember times when you had your wall, and your wall was strong, but the attack of the enemy came, and what happened? Part of that broke off. The enemy's coming at you, and your wall is beginning to chip more and more away. And every time the enemy comes at you, more of your wall is being compromised. And that's tough. But here's something that's even tougher. That's attacks from the outside. But what about the vulnerable attacks from the inside? Those seem to hurt more, don't they? When people who you trusted, people who you love, end up, and there's some battles, and there's some breaking that's going on the inside. And before you know it, you were built on a firm foundation. You were built on the rock. Your relationship was solid. Your health was good. Your business was booming. But before you know it, you look around, and because of attacks from the inside and the outside, you're now surrounded by a pile of rubble, and you can't build. Well, all right, I need to get my life together, and you start trying to get back up on top of something that you did not need to be standing on. You're trying to get back up on something that the foundation is shaky. So what do you got to do? It's time to identify this rubble and get rid of it. What is it time to do? Oh, this one, you're a terrible spouse. You're a horrible parent. You're never going to be good enough. I don't love you anymore. You're such a disappointment. The world would be better without me. I'm such a burden on my loved ones. I'm never going to live a life without pain. I'm never going to experience the freedom. And you've got to identify every single one of the lies that are laying at your feet. Every single one of those lies that you get to the point where you try to build it. You know what? I cleared a lot. I can see the foundation, so I'm just going to go here. It's been so hard. Let me tell you something. Physically, for me, bending over and picking up those rocks is hurting my back. Like, I'm serious. My back is hurting right now from just doing that. So I could say, yeah, I've picked up enough rocks. I think I'm just going to, all right, God, rebuild me right here, right now. Just I can't get rid of that rock. That one's a significant rock. That one's buried deep. So God, do it here. And he's like, the foundation is under that. Get in there, pick it up, move it, get it out of the way, identify it, because I am at the bottom of it. Man, I got a whole lot of rocks here. Get the rubble out of your life. Get rid of what is hindering you from building on a firm foundation. Yeah, the more you work, the more exhausted you'll be about it. The temptation is to stop working and just rebuild on top of the rubble. But when you clear it out, you see the beautiful foundation that is Jesus, that is the Word of God, and that you can build on. Another one of the problems was that some of the Jews were living closer to the enemy than they should have. As I said earlier, the Samaritans were spreading misinformation. They were gearing up to attack Jerusalem, and the Jews who lived near them heard their plans, heard what they were talking about. You see, there were some that were living there in Jerusalem. They were living right there so they could hear what was going on with Nehemiah. But they weren't building a wall around the entire nation of Israel. They were building a wall around Jerusalem. So people who lived near the Samaritans or near the other enemies of Israel here, they were hearing what was going on. In verse 12 it says, at the time the Jews who lived near them came from all directions and said to us, 10 times you must return to us. So the Samaritans who were against the rebuild were influencing those who lived near them in order to discourage the people from working. So they're out there and they're hearing the chatter of the enemy. Oh, we're going to sneak in. They're never going to see us coming, and we're just going to wipe them out. And the Jews that lived that far away weren't the ones working on the wall hearing the good news. They weren't the ones hearing Nehemiah encourage the people. They weren't the ones who were right there surrounded by the promise and seeing the good work that had been taking place. All they're hearing are the lies of the enemy and the discouragement of the enemy. So they were coming in, they were hearing about this plot to attack and stop the rebuild, so they wanted to help. I'm just wanting to help. So I love those people in Jerusalem. I'm going to go help them and tell them that they need to stop what they're doing, because they don't even know how bad it is out here. They don't even know how these people are wanting to kill them. I'm just trying to help. Understand, they meant well, but they didn't know the truth. They only saw what the enemy was saying. They only saw the lies of the enemy. When you're close to the truth, when you've heard the vision, when you've caught the vision of what's going on and what God is doing, if you stay close to it, you get the inspiration, you get the encouragement to do it. They weren't hearing that. All they were hearing was the bad things. And this is what's important. You have to be careful who you allow to speak into your life. You've got to be very careful who you allow to speak into your life. Because there's people that will come, and there are people that you know, and they're just trying to help. But if what advice they give you contradicts what God has already said, ignore what they're saying. It may sound like good things. So many people are so distracted today, even within the church. They have allowed the enemy to get them, like I said earlier, just follow that little nugget of truth away from the actual vision of God, and they focus on that. So that ends up causing so much problem, and that, I'm just trying to help you. I'm just trying to help you. Don't get the vaccine. It's the mark of the beast. I'm just trying to help you. Let me tell you something. The vaccine is not the mark of the beast. If you don't want to get it, don't get it. But don't let it be because you believe it's the mark of the beast. Make your own personal choice. I ain't going to tell anybody what they need to do in regards to your own personal health. But don't believe a lie. If you want to come and have a conversation with me about why you think that that's what's going on, I'll have a conversation with you. But don't believe it. It's dividing people. People are being divided over this shot because it's the mark of the beast. No. Did you deny Christ to get the vaccine? Well, no. Then it ain't the mark of the beast. Lord, why am I on that? If it contradicts the Word of God, it's not truth and will lead you astray. It may look good over here, but if you're living away from the prophecy, if you're living away from the promise, you're going to end up being influenced by those who are also living away from the promise. Look, we were talking about this on Wednesday night. King David, the story of David and Bathsheba. When David had his sin with Bathsheba, he was walking around in his palace, but where his first mistake was not that he looked at Bathsheba. His first mistake was that he allowed the army of Israel with the Ark of the Covenant to go off to war while he stayed. Where was David's mistake? He let the presence of God go, and he didn't go with the presence of God. And it left him vulnerable to his sin. What happens when you have good, well-meaning people, friends, family, whoever, that are not in here digging out provision? They're not in here working the process, cleaning out the way to the foundation. They're coming over here and saying, it's not going to work. I know what attack's coming. And I'm over here working on this like, shut up. God has me doing this. You go back to where you were, or you get down here and you help me dig this out. If that would have been successful, if the people who lived out away and who heard all this and never heard the promise of God, if they had been effective, if the ones working on the wall had listened and be like, oh, well, yeah, no, I'm going to stop now. I don't want to die. Then Tobiah and Sanballat and company would never have had to worry about anything else. Their job would have been done. We didn't even have to go into battle because looky there, all we did was talk and sow a little bit of lie, and there was enough for them to believe it, and the wall's never going to get built. But Nehemiah recognized that this lie from the enemy, this lie that their own people, the people of Judah and the ones who lived in the area around that were near the enemy, he knew that was what was not in line with God's word. And he said in verse 14, I looked and arose and said to the nobles and the officials and the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, for your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. Let me tell you, when you're down there digging it out, when you're throwing away you're removing all this rubble that's surrounding you, you're removing that pain, that one, where's that one? This right here. This rock right here that the enemy threw at me, and it lodged right here and made me question my calling and made me question my own existence. But I'm taking it and I'm throwing it over there. And when somebody tells me fight for my brothers, for my sisters. Come on, get in this. The Lord is great and awesome. Remember the Lord who is great and awesome. That's your halftime speech right there. That's the coach rallying you up. He called his people to the wall and he gave them in-game adjustments. He's like, this is what we're going to do now. He called them and rallied them to finish the work. Verse 15, when our enemies heard that it was known to us that God had frustrated their plan, we all returned to the wall, each to his work. From that day on, half of my servants worked on construction, half held spears, shields, bows, coats of mail. The leaders stood behind the whole house of Judah who were building on the wall. Those who carried burdens were loaded in such a way that each labored on the work with one hand and held a weapon with the other. At any time, at any moment, the physical attack of the enemy could come, and they needed to be ready. So what did that mean they had to do? It meant some of them would have to pull double duty. Again, verse 17, it said, those who carried burdens were loaded in such a way that they labored with one hand and held a weapon with the other. People of Ridge Community Church, we've been pulling double duty for about 18 months now. There's some of you that you feel the burden of the labor. You feel it. You're volunteering in so many different areas, and it just seems like, but every time I get in here and I dig this out, I look back up, and the person that I was working next to has gone on. Maybe they're working on another part of the wall. Maybe they're working on somewhere else. Maybe they've just allowed the enemy to get into their head, and they're not here anymore. But you've got a tool in one hand, and you've got a weapon in the other hand. But it's only temporary. You see, Nehemiah kept someone right there with him. He had someone with him that he needed and he used to rally the people. Verse 18, each of the builders had his sword strapped to his side while he built. The man who sounded the trumpet was beside me. And I said to the nobles and the officials and the rest of the people, the work is great and widely spread. We are separated on the wall, far from one another. Nehemiah knew that he had to keep his people motivated. They were scattered along the wall. All the way around the wall was quite a distance. We talked about it a few weeks ago, just how long it was, where all the gates were. And there were people that were building in front of their house. There were people that were building. There were people from out of town that came in just to do the building. There were some, and that's one of the beautiful things that we talked about a few weeks ago. Sometimes those who used to be your enemies will come and be the ones to help you rebuild. The ones that you thought were your enemies will be right in the trenches alongside you, helping dig out some provision, helping tell that, you get this one that said, I'm not lovable, I'm not good enough anymore. And they will look at you and say, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. But then in verse 20, in the place where you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us. Our God will fight for us. What's the trumpet? Throughout the Old Testament, when they would go into battle or when they would have times of worship, the trumpet would be what was blown. They would come and blow the trumpet. The word says, blow the trumpet in Zion. There's an old song, blow the trumpet in Zion, Zion. Sound the alarm on the holy mountain. Why? What were they blowing the trumpet for? Because it was a call to worship. It was a call to go into battle, into physical battle, into spiritual battle. It was a call to get the people's attention. Let me tell you, the trumpet is blowing right now, and it's a call for you to gather together with other believers, others that you might know, you might not know, those who you might have once been your enemies, but the people who are with you down there in the trenches on the wall, they are scattered all over the world. There are other preachers, teachers, missionaries, moms, dads, grandparents, scattered all over the place that are in this together to rebuild what the enemy is trying to keep you from rebuilding. Don't worry about those that aren't living anywhere near the vision. Well, what's the vision? We are wanting to connect. We connect to God, we connect to others, we connect to serve. And there's some connection that happens, but we can't be connected if we're living out here near the enemy. Well, why do we live out here near the enemy? Because I didn't want to be reminded. I didn't want to continue to live among the rubble. I didn't want to continue to be reminded of what it used to be. So what happens is I'm just going to leave. I'm just going to leave this city. I'm just going to leave this tabernacle. I'm just going to leave this area because it's not what it used to be. And I'm going to go live out here near the enemy because it's just better out here. But the vision is here. But the foundation is here. But the truth is here on the rock, on that whole mountain right there is the same mountain that the temple was built on. It's the same mountain where Abraham, it's believed that Abraham took Isaac to sacrifice him. That is all on that area. And that was where the promise was given to Abraham, and it's where the promise still stands today. The foundation never moves. And that's the beautiful thing about it. No matter what's going on, here is the encouragement. Back in verse 20. When you hear the sound, gather together and rally to that place. Our God will fight for us. Will you stand? Our God will fight for us. Sanballat and Tobiah, we saw at the very beginning of this whole series, they said, you won't. You won't rebuild. They said, if a fox jumps on that wall, it'll fall down. You won't. Their own clans people in Judah, their own family people said, you can't. You can't. You can't rebuild it. We can't. There's too much rubble. We're too tired. But Nehemiah said, God will. Which will the enemy hear? I won't, I can't, or my God will. I'll give you a little flip to the end of this point in the narrative. The book of Nehemiah goes on, and there's a lot more things in there. And we'll get to this part here in a couple of weeks. But in Nehemiah 6:15, so the wall was finished on the 25th day of the month of Elul in 52 days. There was an end there to their work, and they couldn't do it alone. You won't. Oh, yes, I will. You can't. Well, I know that I can't. But my God will. As I begin to pray this morning, if you have need, you can come down. Look, there are pieces of rock all over the place up here. There's some, I broke some off, and they're down there. And I'm gonna say that was on purpose. Some of you, maybe you need to come down to the altar today, and you need to get a piece of this rock. Maybe you need to get a piece of this rock, and you need to identify it. That some lie that the enemy has told you, something that you believe to be true but is not true. Maybe it's some distraction, and you need to take it and you need to set it somewhere so that when you see it in the morning, you pray, God, and His mercies are new every morning, that you look at that rock and you say, God, remove the stones in my life that are keeping me from building on the foundation. Remove the things from my life that I have put there. Remove the pains that I've gone through. Remove everything. And then maybe you just need to pick it up one day, go out to a lake and sling that rock as far as you can into the lake. And if you've seen Top Gun, it's like when Maverick throws Goose's tags into the ocean. He just takes it and just slings it, letting go of what his past hurt was. Maybe that's what you need to do. You need to take that rock and you just need to sling it as far as you possibly can out into a lake where you're never going to see it again. There's rocks all over the place. Come get you one. The bigger the rock, the better. Because He's delivering you. He is He is helping you clear that debris, that rubble, so you can build on that foundation. As I begin to pray this morning, if you have need, you can come. Father,